I was sitting in my lawyer's office on a Thursday afternoon when my son David walked in with his wife Melissa and handed me papers that would change everything. The papers said I was being declared mentally incompetent, said I could no longer manage my own affairs, said I needed a conservatorship, said they were taking control of my finances, and most devastating of all, said they were taking my house. The house I'd lived in for 32 years, the house I'd raised David in, the house my late husband Jerome and I had bought with our savings and fixed up with our own hands. They were taking it, and they were giving it to Melissa because, according to these papers, I was too old, too confused, too incapable of caring for myself or my property. And I needed to sign over everything to David, who would manage it all for me, which really meant Melissa would manage it, because David did whatever Melissa wanted. I looked at my son, the boy I'd carried for 9 months, the child I'd nursed through fevers and bad dreams, the teenager I'd driven to football practice every day, the young man I'd put through college, the person I'd loved more than anyone in the world, and I said, "Is this really what you want? David, do you really think I'm incompetent? Do you really believe I can't take care of myself?" And he couldn't look me in the eye, couldn't meet my gaze, just stared at the floor while Melissa answered for him. "Diane, we're doing this for your own good. You're 62 years old, you're getting forgetful. You're not taking care of the house properly. We found mold in the basement, and the roof needs repairs, and you're living on a fixed income. You can't afford to maintain this property anymore. It's too much for you. So we're going to take over. We're going to move in and take care of everything, and you can move into a nice assisted living facility where you'll have people to look after you, where you won't have to worry about anything." And that's when I knew this wasn't about helping me. This was about taking what was mine. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far it's traveled. My name is Diane Thompson. I'm 62 years old, and what I'm about to tell you is a story about betrayal, about greed, about a son who chose his manipulative wife over his mother, and about how I fought back, how I got revenge, how I made sure they understood that you don't mess with a woman who survived 62 years of life's hardships and come out stronger. Let me start from the beginning. Let me tell you about David and Melissa, and how we got to that moment in the lawyer's office. Let me tell you about the house they tried to steal and about what I did to make sure they never got it. David is my only child. I had him when I was 26, after 5 years of trying, after 3 miscarriages, after being told by doctors I might never carry a pregnancy to term his father Jerome, and I were overjoyed when David was born. He was our miracle baby, our answered prayer, our everything. And I poured everything I had into raising him, into giving him opportunities I'd never had, into making sure he knew he was loved. Jerome worked as a postal worker, and I worked as a school secretary, and together we made enough to buy a modest house in a decent neighborhood on the west side of Detroit. It wasn't fancy, wasn't big, just a 3-bedroom ranch with a small yard, but it was ours, and we were so proud of it. Jerome spent every weekend working on that house, painting, fixing, updating, making it perfect, and I planted flowers in the front yard, grew vegetables in the back, made it a home we raised. David there taught him to ride his bike in the driveway, had birthday parties in the backyard, watched him grow from a baby to a boy, to a man in those rooms. And I loved every inch of that house, loved every memory embedded in those walls, loved knowing it was mine and Jerome's, and would someday be David's. When Jerome died 8 years ago suddenly, from a heart attack at age 54, I thought I'd die too. Thought I couldn't go on without him. We'd been married for 33 years, had built our entire lives together. And suddenly, he was gone, and I was alone in that house, with nothing but memories to keep me company. But I survived. I grieved. I mourned. I cried myself to sleep for months, but I survived. And I kept the house, kept it exactly as Jerome had left it, kept his workshop in the basement, kept his tools organized the way he'd like them, kept the house maintained the way he'd taught me, kept the yard beautiful the way we'd always done together, because that house was my last. Connection to Jerome was the place where our love had lived, was something I wasn't going to give up without a fight. David was supportive after his father died, came around more often, checked on me, helped with heavy repairs, brought groceries when I needed them. And I was grateful. I was so grateful to have a son who cared, who made sure his widowed mother was okay, who seemed to understand how much that house meant to me. But then 3 years ago, David married Melissa, and everything changed. Melissa was 31 when they got married, 15 years younger than David. Beautiful, ambitious, and from the moment I met her, I could tell she thought she was better than us. Better than David's postal worker, father and school secretary mother. Better than our modest house in our working-class neighborhood. Better than everything we'd built and worked for. She made comments, little cutting remarks about how small the house was, how outdated the kitchen was, how the neighborhood wasn't as nice as where she'd grown up, how she couldn't believe David had lived here his whole childhood, like it was something to be ashamed of. I tried to overlook it, tried to tell myself she was just young, just didn't understand the value of what we'd built, just needed time to adjust to being part of our family. But the comments didn't stop. They got worse, more frequent, more pointed. And David never defended me, never told her to stop, never acknowledged that her words were hurtful. He just smiled and nodded and agreed with whatever she said. Like he'd been brainwashed, like he'd forgotten where he came from, forgotten the sacrifices his father and I had made, forgotten that the woman she was insulting was his mother. And then the suggestions started. Melissa began dropping hints about how I should sell the house, should move into something smaller, something more manageable, should take the money and use it for my retirement, should stop being so attached to a building that was just holding me back from enjoying my golden years. And every time she said this, David would nod along, would say, "Mom, maybe she has a point. Maybe it is time to downsize. Maybe you should think about it." And I'd feel my blood pressure rising, feel my hands clenching, feel the urge to scream at both of them that this was my house, my home, my last connection to Jerome, and they had no right to pressure me to give it up. But I didn't scream, didn't yell, just politely said I wasn't interested in selling, wasn't ready. To move, was perfectly capable of taking care of myself and my home, thank you very much, and they'd drop it for a while. But then a few weeks later it would start again. The hints, the suggestions, the pressure. And I started to realize this wasn't just casual concern. This was a campaign. This was Melissa wanting my house and using David to pressure me into giving it up. About a year ago, the suggestions turned into something more aggressive. Melissa started pointing out every flaw in my house, every repair that needed to be done, every sign of aging in the property. "Diane, did you know your roof is missing shingles, Diane? There's a crack in your foundation. Diane, your water heater is leaking. Diane, you really need to replace these windows. They're so inefficient. Diane, the carpet in the living room is worn. You should really get that replaced." And each comment was delivered with this concerned tone, this fake worry, like she was just looking out for me, just trying to help. But I could see through it, could see that she was building a case, building evidence, that I couldn't take care of the property, that it was deteriorating, that I was too old and incapable to maintain it. And she was documenting everything too, taking photos of every flaw, every issue, every sign of wear and tear. And I didn't understand why at the time, didn't realize she was gathering evidence, didn't know she was building a legal case to take my house from me. I just thought she was being critical, just thought she was judging me, just thought she was a shallow, materialistic woman who didn't understand that a home is more than just its physical condition. But I was wrong. She wasn't just judging me, she was plotting, and David was helping her, was going along with every step, was betraying his mother in the worst way possible. Then 6 months ago, things escalated. David and Melissa showed up at my house unannounced on a Saturday morning and said they needed to talk, said they had some concerns they wanted to discuss, said they were worried about me and we needed to have a serious conversation. And I let them in, made coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Jerome and I had eaten thousands of meals, the same table where David had done his homework as a child, and I waited to hear what they had to say. And Melissa pulled out a folder, thick with documents and photos, and she started going through them, point by point, showing me pictures of my roof, showing me pictures of the basement, showing me estimates from contractors, showing me bills I'd forgotten to pay, showing me evidence of what she called my decline. Mom, David said, and his use of that word, mom, felt wrong, felt manipulative, felt like he was using our relationship to soften what was coming. We're worried about you. You're not keeping up with the house. You're missing bill payments. You're forgetting appointments. You're showing signs of cognitive decline, and we think it's time to consider other living arrangements. We think you need more support, more help, more supervision, and we've looked into some really nice assisted living facilities, places where you'd have your own apartment, but also have staff available 24/7 to help with meals and medication and activities. And you wouldn't have to worry about home maintenance or repairs or any of that stress. You could just relax and enjoy your retirement. I sat there listening to this rehearsed speech, listening to my son tell me I wasn't capable of living independently, listening to him suggest I give up my home, my independence, my autonomy. And I felt rage, pure, hot rage building in my chest because I wasn't incompetent, I wasn't declining. I was a healthy, active 62-year-old woman who walked 3 miles every day, who volunteered at my church, who had a sharp mind, and a strong body who occasionally forgot to pay a bill. Because I was busy living my life, not because I was losing my faculties. Yes, my house needed some repairs. Because houses need repairs. That's normal. That's not evidence of incompetence. That's just reality. And yes, I'd missed a couple of appointments because I'd gotten my schedule mixed up, but that happens to everyone, regardless of age. That's not cognitive decline. That's just being human. And the fact that David and Melissa were using these normal occurrences as evidence that I needed to be institutionalized told me this wasn't about concern. This was about something else. And then Melissa said, it said what this was really about. And Diane, we've been thinking that since you're going to be moving anyway, it doesn't make sense for this house to just sit empty. David is your only child, and he's going to inherit it eventually anyway. So why not transfer ownership to him? Now that way he can start maintaining it properly, start making the updates it needs, can move in and take care of it, and you won't have to worry about it anymore. You can just focus on yourself and your health and let us handle everything. And there it was, the real agenda. They didn't want me to move into assisted living so I could be taken care of. They wanted me out of my house so they could move into it, so they could have my home, my equity, my property, without having to wait for me to die. I looked at David, really looked at him, trying to see if there was any trace of the boy I'd raised, the son who'd once loved me, trying to see if he understood how monstrous this proposal was. And I said, David, do you really think I need to be in assisted living? Do you really think I can't take care of myself? Or are you just agreeing with Melissa because you want my house? And he had the decency to look ashamed, had the decency to flush and look away. But he didn't defend me, didn't say no. Mom, of course that's not what this is about. Didn't stand up to his wife, just sat there in uncomfortable silence while Melissa answered for him. Diane, you're being paranoid. This isn't about us wanting your house. This is about what's best for you. We're trying to help you. We're trying to make sure you're safe and taken care of. And if that means us taking over the house to make sure it's properly maintained, then that's what we'll do. But this is about you, not about us. I stood up, then walked to my door, opened it, and said, get out, both of you. Get out of my house and don't come back until you're ready to treat me with the respect I deserve. They left David looking guilty, Melissa looking angry, and I closed the door behind them and I stood in my empty house and I cried because my son had just tried to take everything from me, had just tried to institutionalize me so he could steal my house, and I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't know how to fight back, didn't know how to protect myself from my own child. I thought that was the end of it, thought they'd realize I wasn't going to cooperate and they'd back off, but I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a lawyer, a man named Robert Chen, who said he represented David Thompson and he needed me to come to his office to discuss some legal matters regarding my competency and my estate. And my heart sank because I realized David wasn't giving up, wasn't backing off, was escalating, was actually pursuing legal action to have me declared incompetent so he could take my house. I called my friend Dorothy, who'd been a paralegal before she retired, and I told her what was happening, and she said, "Diane, you need your own lawyer. You need someone to represent you to protect your rights, because if David is serious about this, he can petition the court to appoint a conservator, and if he can convince a judge that you're incompetent, you could lose everything, your house, your money, your independence, all of it. You need to fight this." So I found a lawyer, a woman named Patricia Williams who specialized in elder law, and I went to her office and I showed her the letter from David's lawyer, and I told her everything about the pressure campaign, about Melissa's documentation, about David's betrayal, and Patricia looked at me with these sharp, intelligent eyes, and she said, "Ms. Thompson, do you have any cognitive issues, any memory problems, any difficulty managing your finances or your daily life?" And I said, "No, I'm healthy. I'm capable. I occasionally forget small things, like everyone does. But I'm not incompetent. I'm not declining. I'm being railroaded by my son and his wife because they want my house." And Patricia smiled and said, "Then we're going to make sure they don't get it." Patricia sent a letter to David's lawyer saying I was retaining counsel and would not be cooperating with any conservatorship proceedings, and if David wanted to pursue this, he'd need to file a petition with the court and provide evidence of my alleged incompetence, and we'd fight it every step of the way. And I thought maybe that would be enough. Maybe the threat of a legal battle would make David reconsider, would make him realize what he was doing was wrong. But it wasn't. David filed the petition, filed formal legal paperwork, asking the court to declare me incompetent and appoint him as my conservator, giving him control over my finances, my property, my medical decisions. Everything, and attached to that petition were dozens of pages of documentation photos of my house showing needed repairs, copies of bills I'd supposedly forgotten to pay, statements from neighbors who'd allegedly expressed concern about my welfare medical records, that I didn't even know David had access to, all carefully curated to paint a picture of a woman in decline, a woman who couldn't take care of herself, a woman who needed someone to take over her life. And I was furious, was outraged, was heartbroken because my son was using lies and manipulated evidence to try to steal from me, was willing to publicly humiliate me, was willing to destroy our relationship, all so he and his wife could have my house. Patricia was furious too. She said, "Miss Thompson, most of this evidence is circumstantial or taken out of context. Yes, your house needs some repairs, but that doesn't mean you're incompetent. Yes, you've missed some bill payments, but your accounts are current and you have sufficient funds. That doesn't indicate inability to manage finances. Yes, you've missed some appointments, but there's no pattern of serious cognitive decline. This is a weak case, and we're going to fight it, and we're going to win." The court ordered an evaluation, a psychologist who would assess my mental competency and report back to the judge. And I was terrified, was scared that somehow I'd fail this test, that the psychologist would find something wrong with me that I didn't even know was there. But I went to the appointment, I answered all the questions, I took all the cognitive tests, and the psychologist was kind, was thorough, and at the end she said, "Ms. Thompson, I see no evidence of cognitive impairment. Your memory is good. Your reasoning is sound. Your judgment is intact. You're a healthy, mentally competent adult, and there's no reason you shouldn't be able to continue managing your own affairs." I cried with relief, cried with gratitude, because someone official, someone with authority, had confirmed what I'd known all along, that I was fine, that I was capable, that David's case was based on lies and manipulation. The psychologist's report was submitted to the court, and it completely contradicted everything David had claimed, said there was no evidence of incompetence, said I was fully capable of independent living, said there was no basis for a conservatorship, and I thought that would be the end of it. Thought the judge would throw out David's petition. Thought I'd won, but David's lawyer wasn't done, wasn't giving up, filed additional motions, requested additional evaluations, brought in neighbors to testify about alleged concerning behavior, tried everything to build a case that I was incompetent. And with each new filing, with each new hearing, with each new attempt to take my house, I felt my relationship with David deteriorate, felt the bond between mother and son crumble, felt the love I'd had for him turn into something else, something bitter, something angry. And through all of this, David never called, never tried to talk to me directly, never attempted to explain or apologize or reconsider, just communicated through lawyers, just kept pushing forward with this legal battle, just kept trying to take my house, and I realized he was gone. The son I'd raised, the boy I'd loved, was gone, replaced by this stranger, this greedy, manipulated man who valued property over his mother, who chose his wife's ambitions over his family, who was willing to destroy me to get what he wanted. And that realization was almost worse than the legal battle, was almost worse than the threat to my house. Because I'd lost my child, had lost the most important relationship in my life, had lost the person I'd given everything for, and it was devastating. Finally, after 3 months of legal wrangling, we had our day in court. The judge reviewed all the evidence, reviewed the psychologist's report, heard testimony from both sides, and at the end, she looked at David and she said, "Mr. Thompson, your petition for conservatorship is denied. The evidence clearly shows that your mother is mentally competent and capable of managing her own affairs. This appears to be a family dispute over property, not a genuine concern about your mother's welfare, and I would strongly encourage you to resolve this matter privately rather than through the courts." And David's face went red with anger, and Melissa looked like she wanted to scream, and I felt vindicated, felt victorious, felt like finally someone with authority had seen through their scheme, had recognized what they were really after. But the victory felt hollow, felt empty, because yes, I'd kept my house, but I'd lost my son, and that was a price I hadn't wanted to pay. After the court ruling, David and Melissa stopped contacting me, stopped coming around, stopped pretending they cared. And part of me was relieved, was glad to not have to deal with their manipulation, their pressure, their constant attempts to take what was mine. But part of me was heartbroken, was grieving, was mourning the relationship I'd lost. The son who'd betrayed me, the future I'd imagined, where David would be there for me in my old age, where we'd be family, where he'd care for me the way I'd cared for him, but that future was gone, was destroyed by greed and manipulation, and a terrible woman who'd turned my son against me. I tried to move on, tried to focus on my life, my friends, my church, my house, tried to find joy in the things I had rather than mourning what I'd lost. But it was hard, was so hard, because every day I'd think about David, would wonder how he was doing, would hope he'd call, would hope he'd apologize, would hope he'd realize what he'd done and try to make it right. But he never did, never called, never wrote, never acknowledged that what he'd done was wrong. And I started to realize he never would, because in his mind, he'd done nothing wrong. In his mind, I was the problem. I was the one being unreasonable. I was the one who'd refused to do what was best. And he couldn't see, couldn't understand, couldn't accept that what he'd tried to do was steal from his own mother, was betray the woman who'd given him life. And that realization, that David would never understand, would never apologize, would never try to make things right. That's what finally made me decide to take action, to get revenge, to make sure he understood that actions have consequences, that you don't betray family, that you don't try to steal from your mother without paying a price. I spent weeks planning, thinking about what I could do to make David understand what he'd done, to make him feel a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. And finally, I came up with a plan. It was elegant. It was perfect, and it would teach David and Melissa a lesson. They'd never forget. I called Patricia, my lawyer, and I said, I want to change my will. I want to make sure that when I die, David doesn't get my house, doesn't get any of my property, doesn't benefit from the thing he tried so hard to steal. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Miss Thompson, that's certainly your right, but are you sure this is what you want? David is your only child and, despite everything that's happened, he is still your son. Once you do this, once you cut him out of your will, it's very difficult to undo that decision. And I said, I'm absolutely sure David made his choice when he tried to have me declared incompetent, when he tried to take my house, when he chose Melissa over me. And now I'm making my choice. I'm choosing to protect myself, to make sure he never benefits from his betrayal, and to make sure he understands that actions have consequences. So Patricia drew up a new will, and in that will I left my house to my church. I left it to the Greater Faith Baptist Church, where I'd been a member for 30 years, where Jerome and I had been married, where David had been baptized, where I'd found community and support and faith through all of life's hardships, and I specified that the house was to be sold and the proceeds used to fund a program for widows and single mothers to help women like I'd been when Jerome died, to provide support and resources and community for women who were trying to make it on their own. And I felt good about that decision. Felt like my house would be going to something meaningful, something that would help people, something that honored Jerome's memory and my life's work, rather than going to a son who'd betrayed me and a daughter-in-law who'd orchestrated the whole thing. But I didn't stop there, didn't just change my will and let it sit. I wanted David to know what he'd done, wanted him to understand the consequences of his actions, wanted him to see what he'd lost. So I wrote him a letter, a long, detailed letter explaining everything, explaining how his betrayal had hurt me, how his attempt to steal my house had destroyed our relationship, how his choice to side with Melissa over his mother had cost him his inheritance. And I was very specific. I told him exactly what the new will said, told him that my house was going to the church, told him that he would get nothing, told him that this was the direct result of his actions, that if he'd treated me with respect, if he'd honored me as his mother, if he'd valued our relationship over property, he would have inherited everything. But instead, he'd chosen greed over love. And this was the consequence. And I mailed that letter certified mail, so I'd know he received it, so he couldn't claim he never knew. So he'd have to sign for it and acknowledge its receipt. And then I waited to see how he'd respond, waited to see if this would finally make him understand what he'd done. David received the letter on a Tuesday. I know, because I got the delivery confirmation, and he called me that evening for the first time in 6 months, called me furious, called me screaming into the phone about how I couldn't do this, couldn't cut him out of my will, couldn't give away his inheritance. And I let him yell, let him rage, let him show his true colors. And when he finally ran out of steam, I said very calmly, David, that house was never your inheritance. It was my house, mine and Jerome's. And I get to decide what happens to it, and you made your choice when you tried to take it from me, when you tried to have me declared incompetent, when you chose Melissa over your mother. So yes, I can do this, and I did do it, and there's nothing you can do about it. And he said, this isn't fair. Mom, this isn't right. That house should come to me. I'm your son. I'm your only child. You can't just give it away to strangers. And I said, you're right, David. You are my son, and that made your betrayal so much worse, that made your attempt to steal from me so much more painful, because you of all people should have valued me, should have respected me, should have honored the sacrifices I made to raise you, but you didn't. You chose property over family. You chose greed over love, and now you're facing the consequences. And David said, Melissa was right about you. You're a bitter, vindictive old woman who can't let go of the past, who's punishing me because I was trying to help you. And I laughed, actually laughed, because the delusion was so complete, the denial was so absolute. And I said, David, if you really believe that, if you really think you were trying to help me, then you're more lost than I thought. But one day, maybe years from now, maybe when you're older and Melissa has moved on to her next target, maybe you'll understand what you did. Maybe you'll realize that you tried to steal from your mother and it cost you everything. And I hope, when that day comes, you remember this conversation and you understand that it didn't have to be this way. You made a choice, and this is the result. And I hung up and I didn't answer. When he called back, didn't read the angry texts he sent, didn't engage with his rage because I'd said what I needed to say, had done what I needed to do, and now it was done. The next few days were hard. David kept calling, kept texting, kept leaving voicemails saying I had to reconsider, had to change the will back, had to be reasonable, and Melissa got involved too. Started calling me, started sending messages saying they'd challenge the will, saying they'd sue, saying they'd make sure I regretted this decision. But I didn't respond, didn't engage, just blocked their numbers and moved on with my life. Because I'd made my choice, had set my boundaries, had protected myself, and I wasn't going to let them bully me into backing down, wasn't going to let them manipulate me into changing my mind, wasn't going to give them what they wanted after they'd tried so hard to take it from me. And eventually the calls stopped, the texts stopped, the threats stopped, and there was just silence, just the absence of a relationship that had once been the center of my life, just the emptiness where my son used to be. And I grieved that loss, grieved it deeply, grieved it thoroughly. But I also found peace, found relief, found freedom in not having to deal with their manipulation, their pressure, their constant attempts to take from me my friends at church. Rallied around me, supported me, told me I'd done the right thing, told me I'd protected myself, told me that David's betrayal was his responsibility, not mine and Dorothy, who'd helped me find Patricia, who'd been there through the whole legal battle. Said Diane, I'm proud of you. I know this wasn't easy. I know losing David is painful, but you stood up for yourself. You refused to be victimized. You protected what was yours, and you made sure there were consequences for his actions. And that takes real strength, real courage. And I hope you're proud of yourself, because you should be. And I was proud that I hadn't backed down. Proud that I'd fought back. Proud that I'd protected myself and my home and my legacy. Proud that I'd taught David a lesson even if he wasn't ready to learn it yet. But I wasn't done, wasn't finished with my revenge, because changing my will was just the first step, was just ensuring David didn't benefit from his betrayal. But I wanted to do more, wanted to make sure he really understood what he'd lost, wanted him to see what could have been his if he'd just treated me with respect. So I did something I'd never done before. I got active on social media, created a Facebook account, created an Instagram account, and I started posting about my life, about my house, about the renovations I was making, about the joy I found in my home. And I made sure David could see. It made sure he was watching, made sure he could see everything he'd tried to take. Everything he'd lost. I posted pictures of the new roof I'd had installed using money from Jerome's life insurance, pictures of the remodeled bathroom, pictures of the fresh paint in the living room, pictures of the beautiful garden I'd cultivated, pictures of me happy and healthy and thriving in the house he'd tried to steal. And I knew he was watching, knew he could see it, knew it was driving him crazy to see me living my best life, in the house he'd wanted so badly. And every time I posted something new, I felt a little thrill of satisfaction, felt vindicated, felt like I was showing him exactly what his greed had cost him. And I also started posting about my legacy, started posting about my plans to leave the house to the church, started posting about the widow and single mother program that would be funded by my estate, started making it very public, very known exactly where my property was going after I was gone, so David couldn't harbor any secret hopes that maybe I'd change my mind. Maybe I'd relent, maybe he'd still get something, and the posts got attention, got lots of attention. Friends from church commented, shared, told me how wonderful it was that I was doing this, told me what an inspiration I was, told me they admired my strength and my generosity. And occasionally I'd see David's name in the list of people who'd viewed my posts, knew he was watching, knew he was seething, knew he was realizing what he'd lost. And then, about 6 months after I'd changed my will, something I hadn't expected. David and Melissa separated. She left him, moved out, filed for divorce, And the reason, according to mutual friends, was money was property, was the fact that David no longer had the inheritance she'd been counting. On was no longer the man she'd married, because without the promise of inheriting my house, he was just a regular guy with a regular job and a regular income, and that wasn't good enough for Melissa. Wasn't what she'd signed up for, wasn't worth staying. Married for, and David was devastated, was heartbroken, was destroyed by the woman he'd betrayed his mother for, and I felt vindicated, felt justified, felt like karma had finally caught up with them both, because David had chosen Melissa over me, had betrayed me for her, had destroyed our relationship because of her, and now she was leaving him, was abandoning him, was showing him that her love had been conditional all along, had been based on what she could get from him, not on who he was as a person. And I wanted to feel sorry for him, wanted to reach out, wanted to be the comforting mother I'd always been. But I couldn't, because his pain was a direct result of his choices, was the consequence of his betrayal, was exactly what he deserved, for trying to steal from his mother, for choosing greed over family, for valuing property over people. So I stayed silent, stayed away, let him deal with the consequences of his actions without my support, without my comfort, without my unconditional love, because that's what he'd given up when he'd tried to take my house. About a month after Melissa left him, David called me. It was late evening, and his voice on my voicemail was broken, was raw, was the voice of someone who'd finally hit rock bottom, who'd finally realized what he'd lost. "Mom," he said, "I know you probably don't want to talk to me. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back, but I need you to know, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything, for trying to take your house, for believing Melissa's lies, for treating you like you were the problem, when I was the problem. I was wrong, Mom. I was so wrong, and I've lost everything. I've lost my wife. I've lost you. I've lost the inheritance. I've lost the relationship that mattered most, and it's all my fault, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to take me back, but I needed you to know that I understand. Now, I understand what I did. I understand what I lost. And I'm sorry, I listened to that voicemail 3 times trying to decide if it was genuine, if David really understood what he'd done, or if this was just another manipulation, just another attempt to get what he wanted. And I didn't know. I couldn't tell, couldn't trust my own judgment, because I wanted so badly to believe him, wanted so badly to have my son back, wanted so badly to repair the relationship we'd lost. But I also knew I had to protect myself, had to maintain my boundaries, had to make sure I didn't fall back into old patterns of letting David take advantage of my love. So I didn't call back, didn't respond, just saved the message and continued with my life, continued posting on social media, continued living in my house, continued planning for a future where my legacy would help other women instead of enriching the son who'd betrayed me. David kept calling, left more messages, each one more desperate, more heartfelt, more seemingly genuine. And slowly, very slowly, I started to believe that maybe he really did understand, maybe he really had learned, maybe losing Melissa had been the wake-up call. He needed to see what he'd done, to see what really mattered, to see that family is more important than property. Finally, after 3 months of messages, I called him back, met him at a coffee shop, neutral territory, where we could talk, without the weight of the house, the property, the inheritance hanging over us. And David looked terrible, looked like he'd aged 10 years in the 6 months since I'd seen him, looked broken and small and defeated, and part of me felt sorry for him, but part of me remembered what he'd tried to do, remembered the court hearings, remembered the lawyer's letters, remembered the betrayal Mom he said when he saw me. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me a chance to explain." We sat down and David started talking, started telling me everything about how Melissa had pressured him, had convinced him that I was declining, had made him believe that taking the house was the right thing to do, about how she'd wanted my property, had seen it as her ticket to a better life, had manipulated him into betraying his own mother. And yes, he took responsibility, said he should have known better, should have stood up to her, should have protected me instead of going along with her schemes. But he'd been blinded by love, had been so desperate to make his wife happy that he'd sacrificed his relationship with his mother, and he was sorry, was devastated by what he'd done, was begging for a chance to make it right. I listened to all of this. Listened to him explain and apologize and take responsibility, and when he was done, I said, "David, I appreciate your apology. I appreciate that you finally understand what you did, but understanding doesn't undo the damage, doesn't erase the pain, doesn't restore the trust you broke. You tried to take my house, tried to have me declared incompetent, tried to steal from your own mother, and those aren't things I can just forget, just because you're sorry." Now he nodded, tears in his eyes. "I know, Mom, I know. And I don't expect you to just forgive me. I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I just want a chance to rebuild, to show you that I can be the son. You deserve to prove that I've learned from this, to earn back your trust." And I looked at my son and I thought about everything we'd been through. Thought about the baby I'd held. Thought about the child I'd raised. Thought about the betrayal and the pain and the legal battles, and I thought about forgiveness, about second chances, about whether people can really change. And I said, "David, I'm willing to try. I'm willing to give you a chance to rebuild our relationship, but you need to understand things will never be the same. My will isn't changing. The house is still. Going to the church, you're not getting my property. And if you can accept that, if you can work on rebuilding our relationship without any expectation of financial gain, then maybe we can find our way back to each other. But if this is just another scheme, if you're just trying to manipulate me into changing my mind, then we're done forever." And David said, "I understand, Mom. I don't want your house. I don't want your money. I just want my mother back. I just want a chance to be your son again. And I want to show you that I can put you first, can value our relationship over everything else, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that to you." That was a year ago. A year of slowly rebuilding our relationship. A year of David showing up, proving himself, demonstrating that he'd really changed, that he really understood what he'd done, and I'm cautiously optimistic, cautiously hopeful that maybe we really can repair what was broken, that maybe David really has learned that maybe our relationship can survive this betrayal. He comes over every Sunday, now helps with repairs around the house, sits with me, and drinks coffee and talks about his life. And slowly, very slowly, the wounds are healing. The trust is rebuilding, the love is returning, and I'm grateful for that. Grateful to have my son back, even if things aren't the same, even if there's a scar that will never fully fade, even if I can never completely trust him the way I did before. But my will hasn't changed. The house is still going to the church. David still won't inherit my property, and I've made peace with that decision, have accepted that this is the right choice, both as a consequence for his actions and as a legacy that will help other women who need support. And David has accepted it too, has said he understands, has said he respects my decision, has said he's grateful just to have a relationship with me again, regardless of what happens to the property after I'm gone. And that acceptance, that willingness to prioritize our relationship over money, that's what's giving me hope that maybe he really has changed, that maybe the lesson has been learned. But I'm not naive. I'm not blindly trusting. I'm watching. I'm paying attention. I'm making sure this isn't just another long con, another manipulation, another scheme to get back into my good graces so he can pressure me to change my will, because I've learned my lesson too, have learned that even the people you love most can betray you, have learned that you have to protect yourself, have learned that trust once broken is hard to rebuild and requires constant vigilance. So I'm taking it slow. I'm maintaining boundaries. I'm keeping my guard up while also allowing space for reconciliation, for healing, for the possibility of a restored relationship. And maybe that's the real lesson in all of this, that relationships are complicated, that family can hurt you in ways strangers never could, that love and betrayal can coexist, that you can grieve someone who's still alive, Grieve the relationship you thought you had while trying to build something new with the person they've become. My friends at church have been incredible through all of this, have supported me through the legal battles, through the estrangement, through the slow, painful process of potential reconciliation. Pastor James calls me regularly, checks on me, prays with me, reminds me that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, doesn't mean pretending. The hurt never happened. Doesn't mean allowing yourself to be victimized. Again, true forgiveness, he tells me, means acknowledging the wrong, holding the person accountable, allowing them to face consequences. And then, if they show genuine repentance, if they do the work to change, if they prove over time that they've learned, then cautiously, carefully creating space for a new relationship built on honesty instead of blind trust. And that's what I'm trying to do with David. I'm acknowledging what he did. I'm holding him accountable. I've let him face the consequences, and now I'm watching to see if the change is real, if the repentance is genuine, if he's worthy of a second chance. Dorothy has been more skeptical, has warned me to be careful, has reminded me that abusers often apologize just to regain access to their victims, has told me stories of people who spent years rebuilding trust, only to be betrayed again. And I appreciate her concern, appreciate that she's looking out for me, appreciate that someone is willing to be the voice of caution while I'm feeling hopeful. But I also know that Dorothy doesn't have children, doesn't understand the particular pain of being estranged from your only child, doesn't know the desperate hope that comes with any sign of reconciliation, any possibility of restoration. And I'm not saying her concerns aren't valid. They absolutely are. I'm just saying that the heart of a mother is complicated, is willing to risk hurt for the chance of healing, is willing to be vulnerable for the possibility of restoration, and that vulnerability, that willingness to risk being hurt again, that's something I've had to think long and hard about, because the truth is, David could betray me again, could show his true colors, once I've let my guard down, could revert to his old manipulative ways, once he thinks I trust him again. And if that happens, if he betrays me a second time, it will destroy me, will break me in ways I might not recover from, will confirm that my son is truly lost, that the boy I raised is gone forever, replaced by someone I don't recognize, someone I can't trust, someone I can't love. And that's a terrifying possibility. That's a risk that keeps me up at night. That's why I'm moving so slowly, being so careful, maintaining such strong boundaries, but I'm also not willing to give up completely, not willing to close the door forever, not willing to say that redemption is impossible, that people can't change, that second chances aren't worth giving, because if I believe that if I decide that David is irredeemable, then I'm not just giving up on him. I'm giving up on a fundamental part of my faith, a fundamental part of my humanity, a fundamental belief that people can grow, can learn, can become better than they were. And I'm not ready to abandon that belief, not yet, not while there's still hope. However fragile, however uncertain, however risky. So here we are, a year into this tentative reconciliation, and I'm still protecting my house, still maintaining my will, still ensuring that my property goes to the church to fund programs for widows and single mothers, because that decision wasn't just about punishing David, wasn't just about revenge, wasn't just about making him face consequences. It was also about creating something meaningful, about leaving a legacy that mattered, about making sure my life, my work, my property would help other women who were struggling the way I struggled when Jerome died, the way I struggled when David betrayed me, and that purpose. That meaning, that legacy is too important to give up, just because David is sorry, just because we're rebuilding our relationship, just because I want to believe he's changed. Because at the end of the day, that house represents more than just property, represents more than just real estate, represents 32 years of memories, 32 years of love, 2 years of building a life with Jerome, and then 8 years of surviving without him. And I won't let that be reduced to a commodity, won't let it become just another asset in someone's portfolio, won't let David and some future partner, if he remarries, benefit from what Jerome and I built. Especially not after what he tried to do. Especially not after he tried to steal it from me. The program at the church is already being planned. Even though I'm still alive, still living in my house, still years away from the time when my estate will actually transfer. Pastor James and the church council have been working on the details, have been designing a program that will provide temporary housing for widows, and single mothers will offer financial counseling and job training, will create a support network for women who are trying to rebuild their lives after loss or divorce or abandonment. And they've asked me to be involved, to help shape the program, to share my story, to be a mentor to the women who will benefit from this legacy. And I've said yes, have embraced this opportunity, have found purpose and meaning in turning my pain into something that helps others. And every time I work on this program, every time I meet with Pastor James and the council, every time I think about the women who will be helped, I feel vindicated, feel like my decision to cut David out of my will was the right one, was the just one, was the choice that honored Jerome's memory and my own journey and gave meaning to the house we built together. David knows about the program, knows I'm actively involved, knows that I'm creating something meaningful with the property. He tried to steal, and to his credit, he's been supportive, has said he thinks it's wonderful, has said he's proud of me for creating this legacy, has said he understands why it matters more than passing the house to him. And that support, that understanding, that acceptance is part of why I'm willing to give him a second chance, is part of why I believe maybe he's really changed, is part of why I'm hopeful that our relationship can be restored. But I'm also realistic. I'm also aware that words are easy, that actions are what matter, that David could be telling me what I want to hear, while secretly hoping I'll change my mind, while waiting for an opportunity to pressure me again, while biding his time until I'm older and more vulnerable, and then trying again to take what he wants. So I'm watching, I'm paying attention, I'm noting. Every interaction, every conversation, every moment when David could choose to pressure me about the will, and doesn't could choose to criticize my decision, and doesn't could choose to make it about him and what he's losing, and doesn't. And so far, he's passed these tests, has shown restraint, has demonstrated respect, has proven that maybe, just maybe, he's learned his lesson, has understood that trying to take my house cost him everything, cost him his marriage, cost him his relationship with me, cost him his inheritance, and that the only way forward is to accept my decisions, to respect my boundaries, to value our relationship over money. But I'm still cautious, I'm still careful, I'm still protecting myself, because I've learned the hard way that even the people you love most can betray. You can hurt, you can prioritize their own greed over your well-being. And I won't be victimized again, won't be manipulated again, won't let my love for my son override my need to protect myself. Health is good. I'm 63 now, still active, still sharp, still capable of living independently, still maintaining my house, still volunteering at church, still living the life David tried to take from me. And every day I wake up in this house. Every day I walk through these rooms. Every day I work in the garden. Jerome and I planted. I feel grateful, feel blessed, feel victorious because I fought back, because I protected myself, because I didn't let them win. I didn't let David and Melissa take my home. Didn't let them institutionalize me. Didn't let them steal my independence, my autonomy, my property. And that victory, that triumph, that successful defense of what was mine is something no one can take from me, is something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life, is proof that I'm strong, that I'm capable, that I'm not the incompetent, declining old woman they tried to paint me as. And sometimes I think about Melissa, about the woman who orchestrated this whole betrayal, about the daughter-in-law who saw me, not as a person, but as an obstacle between her and the property she wanted. And I feel anger, feel rage, feel satisfaction that her scheme failed, that she didn't get what she wanted, that she ended up divorced and alone, with nothing to show for her manipulation. But I also feel pity, because what kind of person looks at their husband's widowed mother and sees not a human being deserving of respect, but a mark to be conned, a victim to be exploited, a problem to be solved through legal manipulation? What kind of person marries someone and then immediately starts plotting how to steal from his family, how to isolate him from his mother, how to turn him against the woman who raised him? Melissa is that kind of person, is someone so consumed by greed, by ambition, by the desire for more, that she was willing to destroy a family to get it. And David fell for it, fell for her manipulation, fell for her lies, fell for the idea that taking my house was somehow, helping me was somehow the right thing to do. And he paid the price, paid with his marriage, paid with his relationship with me, paid with his inheritance, paid with years of estrangement and pain and regret. And now he's trying to rebuild, trying to make amends, trying to earn back what he lost. And I'm letting him try. I'm giving him that chance. I'm opening that door, however cautiously, however carefully, however conditionally, because he's my son, because I love him, because I believe in second chances, even when they're risky, even when they might lead to more pain, even when the smart self-protective thing would be to cut him off completely and never look back. But I'm also making sure he understands the terms, making sure he knows that some things can't be undone, can't be taken back, can't be restored to what they were before my will isn't changing. That's non-negotiable. That's the consequence of his betrayal. That's the price of trying to steal from me. And if he can accept that, if he can build a relationship with me that isn't based on expectation of inheritance, that isn't motivated by financial gain, that isn't contingent on me leaving him my property, then maybe we can have something real, something honest, something worth having. But if he can't, if this reconciliation is just another long game, if he's just waiting for the right moment to pressure me again, then we're done. And he knows that I won't give him a third chance, knows that I've set boundaries and will enforce them, knows that I'm watching and waiting and ready to cut him off completely if he betrays me again. And maybe that's not the warm, fuzzy mother-son relationship I once imagined. Maybe it's not the unconditional love and trust I once felt. Maybe it's not the blind faith that your child will always do right by you. But it's real, it's honest, it's based on truth instead of illusion, on boundaries instead of blind trust, on mutual respect, instead of assumed obligation. And maybe that's healthier. Maybe that's stronger. Maybe that's what our relationship should have been all along. Instead of me sacrificing everything for David, instead of me never saying no, never setting boundaries, never demanding respect, instead of me being the endlessly giving mother who expected nothing in return except her son's love. Maybe if I'd set boundaries earlier, if I'd demanded respect from the beginning, if I'd made it clear that taking advantage of me would have consequences, then we never would have gotten to the place where David thought it was okay to try to take my house, thought it was acceptable to have me declared incompetent, thought he could betray me without losing anything that mattered. So maybe this is a lesson for me. A lesson about the importance of boundaries, about the need to protect yourself, even from the people you love most, about the reality that unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional tolerance of bad behavior. And I'm learning that lesson. I'm applying it to my relationship with David. I'm maintaining boundaries while also creating space for reconciliation. And it's hard. It's uncomfortable. It goes against every maternal instinct I have. But it's necessary. It's healthy. It's the only way forward. And the truth is, I'm proud of myself. Proud of how I handled this situation. Proud that I didn't just roll over and let them take my house. Proud that I fought back. That I got a lawyer. That I stood up in court. That I protected what was mine. Proud that I changed my will, that I created a legacy that matters, that I turned my pain into something that will help other women. Proud that I'm maintaining boundaries with David, that I'm demanding respect, that I'm not just welcoming him back with open arms without any accountability. Because women my age, we're often taught to be accommodating, to be understanding, to prioritize peace over our own needs, to smooth things over, to forgive and forget, to put family harmony above our own dignity. And I did that for years, did that with David, did that in my marriage, did that in all my relationships, always being the one who gave in, who sacrificed, who made it work at any cost to myself. But this situation with David trying to take my house forced me to change, forced me to stand up for myself, forced me to say no, this is not acceptable. You will not treat me this way. You will face consequences for your actions. And that was hard, was terrifying, went against everything I'd been taught, everything I'd practiced for 60-some years. But it was also liberating, was empowering, was life-changing, because I learned that I could stand up for myself, that I could fight back, that I could protect what was mine, that I didn't have to just accept bad treatment from anyone, not even from my own son. And that lesson, that knowledge, that strength is something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life, is something that's changed how I move through the world, how I relate to people, how I value myself. My advice to anyone watching this who's dealing with a similar situation, who has family members trying to take advantage of them, who's being pressured to give up property or money or independence, is this: stand up for yourself. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're being difficult or unreasonable or selfish for protecting what's yours. Don't let guilt or obligation or fear of conflict make you give in to demands that aren't right. Don't let people manipulate you by claiming they're just trying to help, just looking out for you, just doing what's best for you, when really they're looking out for themselves. Get a lawyer if you need one document. Everything. Don't be afraid to go to court if necessary, because your property, your money, your independence, these things matter, and you have every right to protect them. And if protecting yourself means damaging relationships, means creating conflict, means being seen as difficult, then so be it. Because relationships built on you giving in to unreasonable demands aren't healthy, aren't worth preserving, aren't relationships at all. They're power dynamics where one person takes and the other gives. And eventually the giver has nothing left, and the taker moves on to the next victim. So don't be the giver. Don't sacrifice yourself. Don't give in. Set boundaries. Demand respect. Protect what's yours. And if people walk away, if they get angry, if they cut you off because you won't let them take advantage of you, then good. You're better off without them anyway, because real love, real family, real relationships don't require you to sacrifice your dignity, your autonomy, your property to maintain them. Real love respects boundaries. Real family values you as a person. Real relationships are built on mutual care, not one-sided exploitation. And yes, it's hard. Yes, it hurts. Yes, you'll grieve the relationship you thought you had. Yes, you'll mourn the people you thought they were, but you'll also discover your own strength, your own resilience, your own ability to survive without them. And that's worth everything. That's worth more than any relationship. That's worth more than avoiding conflict, because at the end of the day, you have to live with yourself. You have to look at yourself in the mirror. You have to know that you stood up for yourself, that you protected your dignity, that you didn't let anyone make you a victim. And that knowledge, that pride, that self-respect will sustain you, will empower you, will transform you in ways you never imagined. And that's what happened to me. That's my story. That's how I went from being a widow, being pressured by her son and daughter-in-law, to give up her house, to being a woman who fought back, who protected herself, who created a meaningful legacy, who rebuilt her life on her own terms. And yes, I lost my son for a while. Yes, I went through months of pain and loneliness and grief, but I also gained myself, gained my dignity, gained my strength, gained the knowledge that I could survive anything, could face any challenge, could protect what was mine. And that's a gift. That's a transformation. That's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. They said I was too old, said I was incompetent, said I needed someone to manage my life for me, said they should take my house, and I proved them wrong. Fought back in court, got a lawyer, changed my will, created a legacy that will outlive me, all while maintaining my independence, my autonomy, my capability, and now a year later, I'm still living in my house, still maintaining it, still taking care of myself, still proving every day that I'm not the declining, incompetent old woman they tried to paint me as, and my son is trying to rebuild our relationship, is showing remorse, is doing the work to earn back my trust, and I'm giving him that chance. However cautiously, however carefully, however conditionally, because I believe in second chances, believe people can change, believe redemption is possible. But I'm also protecting myself, maintaining boundaries, ensuring that my property will go where I want it to go. To help other women, to create a legacy that matters, to honor the life Jerome and I built together. And that's my revenge. That's my victory. That's how I won. Not by taking anything from David, not by hurting him the way he hurt me, but by protecting myself, by standing strong, by creating something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal, and by teaching him that actions have consequences. That you can't betray your mother without losing something precious, that relationships require respect, and that respect once lost is hard to regain, and maybe he's learning that lesson. Maybe he's changing. Maybe our relationship can be restored. But whether it can or not, whether David fully redeems himself or not, whether we end up close again or forever distant, I know one thing. I know I did the right thing. No, I protected myself. No, I created a legacy that matters, and that's enough. That's everything. That's the victory that no one can take from me. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story on the screen. You can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.